6 months after his wife's tragic death, veteran Ryan believed his war was finally over. But one evening his loyal dog, Shadow, began to act strangely, insistently nudging one single photograph of Anya. The dog's persistence forced Ryan to look closer, revealing the impossible: a set of invisible GPS coordinates. Instantly, the simple narrative of a tragic accident began to fracture. Ryan didn't yet know that this path would lead him to the truth behind his wife's death, but that it would also place him and his loyal companion in the crosshairs of the very people who orchestrated it. The silence in the small Montana cabin was a heavy blanket, thick and suffocating. For 6 months, it had been Ryan's only constant companion, a stark contrast to the life he had once shared with his wife, Anya. He sat in a worn leather armchair, the wood stove in the corner offering a low, crackling protest against the quiet. Outside, the vast, unforgiving wilderness stretched for miles, a landscape that had once promised peace, but now only echoed his emptiness. Ryan was a man carved from hardship. At 42, his tall, lean frame still held the disciplined strength of his years in the military. But the easy smile he once wore was gone, replaced by the rugged lines of grief. His short brown hair was dusted with silver at the temples, and a scruffy beard shadowed a jaw that was perpetually tight. He wore his usual uniform of solitude, a faded gray t-shirt under a plaid flannel shirt of navy and beige, the buttons left undone, and a pair of worn denim jeans tucked into sturdy work boots. This quiet life, this self-imposed exile, was his attempt to manage the ghosts of his past, the haunting memories from his service that the VA doctors had labeled post-traumatic stress disorder. But Anya's death had created a new ghost, one that was far more relentless. At his feet lay Shadow, a magnificent 7-year-old German shepherd. His thick coat was a distinguished mix of gray and white, a salt and pepper pattern that gave him an air of wisdom. Shadow was more than a pet. He was a lifeline, a constant, steady presence, whose loyalty had seen Ryan through the darkest nights, both overseas and now, in the throes of his grief. The dog sighed softly in his sleep, a warm, reassuring sound in the cold silence. The official report had been painfully simple: a mountaineering accident. Anya, an experienced climber, had been on a solo hike when a sudden storm rolled in. She had lost her footing on a treacherous ridge. It was a tragedy, they said, an unlucky turn of fate. And for 6 months, Ryan had forced himself to believe it, clinging to the narrative because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. He had lost enough to war. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his wife to anything but the cruel indifference of nature. Driven by a familiar ache, Ryan leaned over and pulled a heavy, leather-bound photo album from the small table beside his chair. Its pages were filled with the life they had built together, a life that now felt like a story about someone else. He opened it carefully, the scent of old paper and memories rising to meet him. There they were on their wedding day in 2015, young and impossibly happy. There was the small house they had bought, the garden Anya had loved so much, and the countless photos from their hikes, their faces bright with the joy of shared adventure. He paused on a page near the end, a collection of photos from the year before she died. His gaze fell upon a picture that always made his chest tighten. It was Anya, standing on a mountain summit, somewhere here in Montana. She was alone in the frame, her arms outstretched as if to embrace the world, a brilliant, fearless smile on her face. Her red jacket was a splash of vibrant color against the stark gray rock and endless blue sky. She was so full of life, so capable. The idea that she could simply slip and fall had always felt wrong, a dissonant note in the symphony of who she was. As he stared at the photograph, Shadow stirred. The big dog lifted his head, his intelligent eyes fixed on Ryan. He let out a low whine, then rose to his feet and padded over, resting his heavy head on Ryan's knee. Ryan absently stroked the dog's soft ears, his eyes still locked on Anya's smiling face. But Shadow wasn't content. He nudged Ryan's hand away from his head, and then, with deliberate purpose, pushed his wet nose against the photograph of Anya on the mountain. He nudged it once, then again, more insistently, his whine growing slightly more urgent. "What is it, boy?" Ryan murmured, his voice rough from disuse. It was unusual behavior. Shadow was a calm, stoic animal, not prone to strange impulses. Puzzled, Ryan carefully slipped the photograph from its plastic sleeve. It was a standard 4x6 print, the back of it smooth and white. He looked at it, then back at Shadow, who was now staring at the photo in his hand with an unwavering intensity. Ryan turned the photograph over in his hand, preparing to slide it back into the album. But as he did, the flickering light from the wood stove caught the back of the print at a peculiar angle. For a split second, he saw something, a faint, ghost-like shimmer on the paper. He stopped, his heart giving a sudden, hard thump. He tilted the photo again, angling it toward the light. There it was. A series of numbers, written in an ink that was almost invisible, a chemical sheen that only revealed itself when the light hit it just right. He had to squint to make them out. It was a long string, separated by a comma. They weren't random. They were coordinates, a latitude and longitude. A cold dread, mingled with a sharp electric pulse of adrenaline, shot through him. The silence of the cabin no longer felt heavy. It felt watchful. He looked from the hidden numbers to Shadow, who sat perfectly still, his gaze knowing and steady. Why would Anya hide GPS coordinates on the back of a photograph? Why use an invisible ink? The official story was clean, tragic, and simple. This was not. This was a secret. The grief that had held him captive for 6 months did not disappear, but it shifted, making room for something else, something dangerous and unsettling, yet alive. It was suspicion. It was a mission. For the first time since he had received the terrible news, a flicker of the man he used to be, the soldier who looked for patterns and pursued the truth, began to stir. He looked down at the numbers, then back at his loyal companion. The journey to the end of those coordinates would be a journey into the unknown, but he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would not be taking it alone. Dawn broke cold and sharp over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Ryan hadn't slept. The coordinates were a burning brand in his mind, a single point of focus that cut through the fog of his grief. The soldier in him, long dormant, was now awake and in command. He moved with a quiet, methodical purpose, packing a small duffel bag with essentials: water, a first aid kit, a compass, and a map of the region. His last stop was a tall steel locker in the corner of his bedroom. He unlocked it, the metallic click echoing in the still morning air. Inside, resting in a felt-lined rack, was his hunting rifle, a bolt-action model he hadn't touched since his last trip with Anya. He checked the chamber, his movements practiced and sure. A soldier's instinct, a deep-seated caution honed by years of training, told him that, wherever he was going, he should not go unprepared. He slung the rifle case over his shoulder. Shadow watched his every move, his tail giving a low, uncertain thump against the floorboards. When Ryan picked up his keys, the dog was instantly on his feet, a silent question in his intelligent eyes. "Come on, boy," Ryan said, his voice a low rumble. "We're going for a ride." The engine of his old pickup truck grumbled to life, shattering the morning peace. As they pulled onto the main road, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. The vast, open country of Montana rolled by, a beautiful and lonely landscape of sweeping plains and distant, snow-capped peaks. The miles dissolved under his tires, but his mind was traveling backward in time. He remembered an argument, about a year ago. It had been late, and Anya had just returned from one of her research trips. She looked exhausted, a tension in her shoulders that even her bright smile couldn't hide. "Where do you go, Anya?" he had asked, his voice laced with a concern that bordered on frustration. "You're gone for days. This field research, it feels like more than that." She had turned away, busying herself with her pack. "It's just work, Ryan. Important, but complicated. You know I can't talk about the specifics." Her reply was gentle but firm, a wall he could not breach. He had let it go, trusting her. But the memory now tasted like ash. Her secrets hadn't been about work, they had been about survival. An hour into the drive, he pulled over at a scenic overlook to let Shadow stretch his legs. The air was crisp and clean. While Shadow sniffed intently at a line of pine trees, Ryan took the photograph of Anya from his pocket. He stared at her smiling face, then turned it over, the invisible coordinates now a tangible link to her hidden life. He ran his thumb over the simple wooden frame that held the picture. That's when he felt it. A tiny, almost imperceptible ridge along the bottom edge, a slight unevenness that didn't belong. His pulse quickened. He pulled out his multi-tool and used the tip of the knife to carefully pry at the seam. The wood splintered slightly, and a tiny black chip, no bigger than a grain of rice, fell into his palm. It was a micro GPS tracker. A wave of ice-cold fury washed over him. He had been watched. For how long? Since the funeral? For the entire 6 months he had been lost in his sorrow, someone had been monitoring him, treating his grief as a data point. He crushed the tracker under the heel of his boot. The small crunch of plastic and circuits is a deeply satisfying sound. He was no longer a grieving husband. He was a target. Back in the truck, his senses were on high alert. Every car in his rearview mirror was a potential threat. 10 minutes later, he spotted it. A black, late-model pickup truck. It had been a few cars behind him before, but now it was closer, maintaining a steady distance. It was too clean for a farm truck, its windows tinted too dark. Coincidence was a luxury he could no longer afford. Ryan's training took over. He made a sudden turn onto a winding county road, the tires of his old truck kicking up gravel. The black pickup followed. He pushed the engine, the familiar roads of his home state becoming a grid for an impromptu evasion maneuver. He took another sharp turn onto an unpaved logging trail, a jarring, bumpy ride that would be madness for a casual driver. But the black truck was still there, relentless. Finally, Ryan swerved onto a narrow access road nearly hidden by overgrown brush, a route he knew led back to a less traveled highway. He gunned the engine, and when he emerged onto the pavement, he looked back. The black truck was gone. He had lost them. But the confirmation was chilling. The threat was real. An hour later, the GPS on his phone led him to his destination. It wasn't a landmark or a building, just a point on the map where an unmarked dirt road branched off from the main highway, disappearing into a dense forest of towering pines. He pulled his truck onto the shoulder, the engine ticking as it cooled. This was it. He killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was different from the one in his cabin. This silence was alive, filled with the whisper of the wind through the trees and the distant call of a bird. He looked at Shadow, who was sitting alert in the passenger seat, his ears perked, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. Ryan gave the dog a reassuring scratch behind the ears, then grabbed his rifle and his bag. The truth, whatever it was, lay down that road, and together they walked into the trees to find it. The dirt road was less of a road and more of a suggestion, a narrow track that wound its way deep into the heart of the forest. Ryan walked with the rifle held in a low, ready position, his senses sharp, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves registering in his mind. Shadow padded silently beside him, his gray and white form a phantom in the dappled sunlight. The dog's ears swiveled, constantly sampling the air, his presence a silent assurance. After a mile, the path began to climb. They emerged onto a rocky outcrop that offered a clear view of the valley below. And there it was. Nestled in a clearing was a small compound of rustic log cabins, smoke curling lazily from a single stone chimney. It looked peaceful, idyllic even, but Ryan's trained eyes saw more. He saw the perimeter, a tall chain-link fence, topped with crude but effective rolls of barbed wire, encircled the entire property. He could make out the figures of 2 people patrolling the fence line, their dark clothing making them stand out against the green landscape. This was no simple retreat. It was a fortress. He took a deep breath, the crisp mountain air doing little to calm the knot in his stomach. He gave Shadow a quiet command, and the 2 of them began their descent. moving carefully through the trees, approaching the compound from the north. As they drew closer, a side gate came into view. It was a simple steel gate, but the chain and padlock holding it shut were thick and heavy. Before Ryan could even formulate a plan, a voice cut through the air, sharp and authoritative. "That's far enough." Ryan froze. Two men emerged from the trees, rifles pointed directly at his chest. They moved, with an efficiency that spoke of training. Shadow let out a low, rumbling growl, the fur on his back bristling. Ryan placed a calming hand on the dog's neck. "Easy, boy." He slowly raised his free hand, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Ryan said, his voice steady. "I'm looking for a place called Whispering Pines Sanctuary." The two men exchanged a look. Just then, a third figure appeared, walking toward them from inside the compound. This man was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a wiry, compact build. His face was a roadmap of hard-won experience, etched with lines of worry and concentration. He had thinning gray hair and a pair of piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through Ryan. He wasn't armed, but he carried himself with an air of quiet command that was more intimidating than any weapon. He stopped a few feet from the gate, his sharp gaze taking in Ryan, the rifle, and the watchful German shepherd. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. "My name is Ryan," he replied. "This is Shadow, my wife." Her name was Anya. I think she knew this place. The mention of Anya's name had a visible effect on the man. The hardness in his eyes softened for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of something that looked like pain. He gave a curt nod to the two guards, who lowered their rifles but did not relax their stance. "Let him in," the older man said. He unlocked the gate and swung it open. "My name is Marcus." Ryan and Shadow stepped inside. The air within the compound was thick with a tense, watchful energy. People peered from the windows of the cabins, their faces pale and drawn. He was inside Anya's secret. Marcus led them to the largest of the cabins, a building that served as a communal dining hall and meeting space. The inside was sparse, but clean. Marcus gestured for Ryan to sit at a long wooden table, then poured 2 cups of coffee from a steaming pot. "Anya spoke of you," Marcus began, his voice low. "She said you were a good man, a soldier." "I was," Ryan said, the word tasting strange in his mouth. "What is this place, Marcus?" Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Ryan's. "This sanctuary," he said, "is a safe house. It's a refuge for people who know too much. Journalists, researchers, former employees, all people who were targeted by a corporation called Omnigen Dynamics." The name hit Ryan like a physical blow. Omnigen. He knew them. A biotech giant, a pillar of the industry, lauded for their innovations. He'd even owned stock in them once. "Anya was their target?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No," Marcus said, his expression grim. "Anya wasn't their target. She was their hunter. She was the one who brought all these people together. She was the founder of this place, Ryan. She was our leader." The room seemed to tilt. The image of his wife, the vibrant, smiling woman in the photograph, was being replaced by someone he didn't know. A leader of a secret resistance. A protector of the hunted. The weight of her secret life pressed down on him, and he finally understood the exhaustion he had seen in her eyes, the tension she carried in her shoulders. It wasn't just work. It was a war. "Why?" Ryan choked out the word, his throat tight with a storm of emotions. "Why wouldn't she tell me?" Marcus looked at him with a profound, almost paternal sympathy. "Because she loved you," he said simply. "She saw the battles you were still fighting every single day after you came home. She knew about the PTSD, Ryan. She saw the ghosts you carried. The last thing in the world she wanted was to pull you into another war. She kept this from you, not to deceive you, but to protect you. This was a burden she chose to carry alone, for you." The truth, when it finally came, was a devastating combination of love and betrayal. His quiet life, the peace he had so desperately sought, had been a gift, purchased at a price he never knew she was paying. And now, he was standing in the very heart of the secret she had died to keep. The coffee in Ryan's cup had gone cold. He stared into the black liquid, his own haunted reflection staring back. Anya, a leader. Anya, a protector. The words circled in his mind, refusing to land. The woman he knew loved quiet mornings and the smell of rain. The woman who could spend hours tending to her garden was also a warrior, fighting a secret war. The revelation was a chasm that had opened at his feet, separating the life he thought he knew from the one she had actually lived. "Marcus," he began, his voice raspy. "The report said it was an accident. A storm." She slipped. Marcus shook his head slowly, a deep sadness in his blue eyes. "There was no storm that day, Ryan. We checked the weather logs. It was clear. What happened to Anya was no accident. It was an assassination." The word hung in the air, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Assassination. It was a word from his old life, a word that belonged to the dusty, violent world he had tried so hard to leave behind. It did not belong in the same sentence as his wife's name. "How?" Ryan demanded, his voice rising. "How can you be sure?" "Because we have a source inside Omnigen's R&D department," Marcus explained, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Anya had been investigating a project codenamed Brittle Strand. It's a chemical compound, colorless and odorless. When applied to polymer-based materials like a climbing rope, it doesn't leave any immediate trace, but under stress, under the repeated strain of a climber's weight, it causes a catastrophic failure of the material's molecular structure. The fibers just let go. He let the horrifying image sink in. One of their security teams had been tracking her for weeks. They knew her route. All they had to do was get to her equipment beforehand, apply the compound, and wait. To the rest of the world, it looks like a tragic equipment failure. A simple accident. A violent tremor ran through Ryan. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image was seared into his mind. Anya, high on a rock face, trusting her life to a rope that had been designed to fail. He saw her smile, saw the joy in her eyes turn to terror in that final, horrifying moment. A wave of nausea washed over him, and then a memory pierced through the haze of his shock. A conversation from months before her death. She had been cleaning her climbing gear at the kitchen table. "This is strange," she had said, running a section of rope through her fingers. "This is a brand new line, but it feels off, almost stiff." He had dismissed it as a manufacturing quirk. Now, her casual words were a death sentence he had failed to read. The grief that had been his constant companion for 6 months transformed into something new, something white-hot and terrifying. It was rage, pure and absolute. But underneath the rage was a crushing layer of guilt. She had faced this monster alone. She had gone on secret trips, lived a double life, and ultimately walked to her death. All to preserve the fragile peace he needed to function, to keep his own demons at bay. His tranquility had been her sacrifice. "She did it to protect me," Ryan said, the words tearing from his throat. He looked at his hands, seeing not a grieving husband, but a soldier who had let his guard down. A man who had been so lost in his own war that he hadn't seen the one his wife was fighting right beside him. The heavy wooden door of the cabin creaked open. A few of the other residents, drawn by the raised voices, stood hesitantly in the doorway. There was a young woman with dark, fearful eyes, her thin frame swallowed by a large sweater. She was a journalist, Marcus later explained, who had gotten too close to the truth. Beside her was an older man with the weary, stooped shoulders of a scientist who had seen his life's work twisted into something malevolent. Their faces were etched with the same emotion, a deep, hollow despair. They were ghosts, just like him, haunted by a corporation that had stolen their lives. They looked at Ryan, their expressions a mixture of pity and weary curiosity. They saw another broken man, another victim. But something inside Ryan had irrevocably shifted. The grief, the guilt, the rage, they were not breaking him. They were forging him into something new. The fog of PTSD, the heavy blanket of sorrow, it was all burning away, leaving behind the hard, sharp clarity of purpose. He stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He was no longer the quiet, reclusive man who had walked out of his cabin that morning. His shoulders were straight, his jaw was set, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, cold resolve. The soldier was back. He looked at Marcus, then at the handful of survivors huddled in the doorway. He saw their fear, their hopelessness. Anya had built this place to protect them, to give them a fighting chance. Her fight was now his. "What's our status?" Ryan asked, his voice devoid of its earlier tremor. It was the voice of a commander. "How many people are here? What are our supplies? What's our defensive situation?" Marcus stared at him, a flicker of surprise, and then profound respect in his eyes. He saw the transformation. He saw the leader Anya had always known was there. The survivors in the doorway shifted, their expressions changing from pity to a dawning, fragile hope. For 6 months, they had been hiding, waiting for the end. But the arrival of Anya's husband, the quiet soldier, had changed the equation. The air in the sanctuary, once heavy with despair, now held the faintest spark of a new beginning. It was the spark of a fight. The spark of hope Ryan's arrival had ignited was fragile, and in the days that followed, it threatened to be extinguished by the cold reality of their situation. Marcus led Ryan from the main cabin to a smaller, more secluded one at the edge of the compound. This had been Anya's office, her command center. Inside, the walls were covered in maps, charts, and photographs, a complex web of connections that traced Omnigen's dark influence across the globe. It was the room where she had waged her secret war. On a simple wooden desk sat a ruggedized laptop, its screen dark. Beside it was a heavy-duty external hard drive. Shadow, who had followed them inside, went immediately to the corner of the room where a small, worn dog bed lay, a scent of his beloved owner still lingering in the fabric. He circled once before settling down with a soft sigh. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice low as he gestured to the desk. "This is Anya's life's work. Everything she gathered. Internal memos, research data, financial records, encrypted communications. It's all on this drive. Enough evidence to expose Omnigen's illegal experiments, their bribery, their cover-ups. Enough to put them away for a very long time." Ryan ran a hand over the cool metal casing of the hard drive. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the secrets his wife had died to protect. "So, what's the problem?" he asked. "Why haven't you used it?" Marcus powered on the laptop. He navigated through a series of folders until he reached the final one. It contained hundreds of files, all neatly organized, but at the very bottom was a single file that was different. Its icon was a stark, locked padlock. The file was named Croft Protocol. "This is the problem," Marcus said, tapping the screen. "This is the keystone. We have mountains of evidence against the corporation, but this file, we believe, contains the direct link. The unredacted orders, the kill authorizations, signed by the CEO himself, Julian Croft. It's the smoking gun. Without it, Croft can claim ignorance, blame it all on rogue employees, and walk away clean while the company takes the hit." Ryan stared at the locked icon. "It's encrypted, beyond anything we've ever seen," a new voice added. The young journalist Ryan had seen earlier now stood in the doorway. She was small and bird-like, with a sharp, intelligent face and tired eyes that had seen too much. "My name is Lena. I was a cybersecurity reporter before this. I've worked with some of the best white hat hackers in the business. We've tried everything: brute force attacks, dictionary attacks, quantum computing algorithms. The encryption is a custom job, military grade or higher. It's a digital fortress. Anya was the only one who could open it," Marcus added, his voice heavy with resignation. "She had the key. We don't know if it was a password, a physical token, a biometric scan. Whatever it was, we believe it died with her on that mountain." The hope that had surged through Ryan just days before now seemed like a distant memory. He felt the crushing weight of their predicament. They were standing at the 1-yard line with a wall of steel in front of them. The entire operation, Anya's entire sacrifice, hinged on this one locked file. In the main cabin that evening, the mood was somber. The initial optimism had faded, replaced by the familiar cloak of despair. The small group of survivors sat around the long table, a meager stew simmering on the stove. The scientist, a gentle gray-haired man named Dr. Eris Thorne, who had once been a lead geneticist for Omnigen, stared blankly into the fire. "It's pointless," he murmured, his voice cracking. "We've been over this for months. Without that file, we have nothing that will stick to Croft. And he's the one who gave the orders. He's the monster." Lena, picking at a loose thread on her sweater, agreed. "Maybe we should think about leaving. Scattering. We can't stay here forever. Our supplies are running low." They found Anya. "Sooner or later, they'll find this place." The sentiment rippled through the small group. Heads nodded in weary agreement. The will to fight had been eroded by months of hiding and the constant grinding fear. Their leader was gone, and her final secret was locked away, beyond their reach. The chain of evidence was broken. Ryan listened, saying nothing. He felt the despair trying to take root in his own heart. He looked at the faces around the table, seeing the reflection of his own grief and hopelessness from just a few days prior. Anya had fought for these people. She had believed they were worth saving. Running was not an option. Not anymore. He felt a familiar wet nose press into his hand. He looked down to see Shadow staring up at him, his gaze steady and unwavering. The dog seemed to sense the shift in the room, the creeping tendrils of defeat. In that moment, Ryan realized that Anya had left him more than just a mission. She had left him a responsibility. He pushed his chair back and stood up. All eyes turned to him. "No one is leaving," he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the murmurs of defeat. "Anya didn't die so we could run. She died to give us a chance. There's a key. We just haven't found it yet. We're going to tear this place apart, go through every single thing she ever touched, until we do." His words hung in the silence. It wasn't a promise of easy victory, but it was a promise to continue the fight. For the first time in a long time, the residents of Whispering Pine Sanctuary had a leader again. The despair hadn't vanished, but it had been pushed back, held at bay by the stubborn resolve of a soldier who had just found a new war to fight. The search was a descent into organized frustration. For 3 days, Ryan, Marcus, Lena, and the others meticulously combed through every inch of Anya's cabin. They read through her journals, page by page, searching for a hidden code or a cryptic clue. They examined the spines of her books, checked for loose floorboards, and sifted through her personal effects with the careful precision of archaeologists. But they found nothing. With each passing hour, the fragile hope Ryan had instilled began to fray. The residents grew quiet again, the initial burst of energy replaced by a weary resignation. They were chasing a ghost. Lena sat hunched over the laptop, running diagnostic programs that all came to the same conclusion. The file was impenetrable. Ryan sat on the steps of Anya's cabin, the cool evening air doing little to soothe his frayed nerves. He felt the familiar weight of failure settling on his shoulders. He had made a promise to these people, a promise to continue Anya's fight, but he was leading them down a dead end. Throughout the search, Shadow had been a quiet observer. He would lie on Anya's old dog bed, his head on his paws, watching them with his intelligent, patient eyes. But on the evening of the 3rd day, his behavior changed. He got up and padded over to Ryan, whining softly. He was wearing an old, worn leather collar, the one Anya had given him when he was just a pup. It was different from the sturdier nylon one he usually wore for patrols. Ryan had switched them out, thinking the familiar scent of the old collar might comfort the dog. Now, Shadow nudged Ryan's hand with his head, not for a pet, but with a strange insistence. Then he rubbed the side of his neck, where the leather collar sat, against Ryan's arm. "What is it, boy?" Ryan asked, his voice tired. He absently stroked the dog's head, but Shadow pulled away. He repeated the gesture, rubbing the collar against Ryan's hand again, more forcefully this time. He let out a soft huff of air, a sound of canine exasperation. Ryan looked at the collar. It was simple, made of dark brown leather, softened and cracked with age. A small circular metal tag hung from it, engraved with Shadow's name on one side and Ryan's phone number on the other. It was just a collar. But Shadow was persistent. He whined again, a low, pleading sound, and nudged Ryan's hand one more time, his nose pushing directly against the worn leather. Ryan sighed. He was failing these people, and now he felt like he was failing his dog. He gave Shadow a reassuring scratch. "Okay, boy, I get it. You want some attention." He unbuckled the collar. As he ran his thumb along the worn surface, he felt something. It was almost nothing. A tiny imperfection in the smooth leather, a place where the seam was slightly raised. He had touched this collar 1,000 times and never noticed it. His fingers, calloused and less sensitive than they used to be, had always passed right over it. His heart began to beat a little faster. He held the collar up to the fading light, turning it over and over. There, on the inside curve, was a slit so fine it was nearly invisible, perfectly aligned with the stitching. It wasn't a tear. It was a deliberate cut, sealed so carefully that it was almost seamless. "Marcus," Ryan called, his voice tight. "Lena, get over here. Now." They gathered around him on the cabin steps, their faces etched with weary curiosity. Ryan took out his multi-tool and used the tip of the small knife to carefully work at the hidden slit. The leather parted, revealing a tiny, hollowed-out space within the collar. And nestled inside was a minuscule object wrapped in a small piece of plastic. With trembling fingers, Ryan tipped the collar, and a micro SD card fell into his palm. The silence was absolute. Everyone stared at the tiny black square as if it were a holy relic. It was so small, so simple, yet it held the weight of all their hopes. Lena was the first to speak, her voice a hushed whisper. "Anya, you brilliant, brilliant woman." They rushed back inside to the laptop. Lena's hands, usually so steady on the keyboard, trembled slightly as she inserted the card into a small adapter and slid it into the computer's port. A new drive appeared on the screen. It contained a single video file. She double-clicked it. Anya's face filled the screen. She was sitting at the same desk they were now gathered around. She looked tired, the strain of her secret life visible in the faint lines around her eyes, but her expression was calm and determined. "Hello, Ryan," she began, her voice filling the small, silent room. A collective breath was held. "If you are seeing this, it means I'm gone, and it means I failed. I am so sorry. I am sorry for the secrets, and I am sorry for the burden I am about to place on you." She paused, taking a steadying breath. "But if you are seeing this, it also means that our best boy, our Shadow, did his job. He brought you the final key." She smiled, a sad, beautiful smile that made Ryan's chest ache. He was always the most trustworthy member of our little family, wasn't he? "The file, the Croft Protocol, is locked," she continued, her tone becoming more businesslike. "The password isn't a word or a date. It's a number. It's a number that is a part of you. A number I know you will never, ever forget. It's your service number, Ryan." Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. His service number. A sequence of digits burned into his memory. A number that had defined him for a decade, a symbol of a life he had tried to leave behind. "I chose it," Anya's voice explained from the screen, "because it is something only you would know for certain, something no one could ever guess or force from anyone else. It's yours alone. It's the key to finishing this. I love you, Ryan, more than you will ever know. Now, go get him." The video ended. The room was silent, thick with emotion. Ryan stared at the blank screen, his wife's final message echoing in his heart. She hadn't left him. She had trusted him. He turned to the laptop. The password prompt for the Croft Protocol was still on the screen, a blinking cursor waiting. With steady hands he typed in the sequence of numbers, a familiar rhythm under his fingertips. He hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the padlock icon vanished. The file was open. The moment the file unlocked, the atmosphere in Anya's cabin crackled with a new, intense energy. The collective despair that had plagued them for months vanished, replaced by the electric hum of possibility. Lena, Marcus, and Ryan huddled around the laptop, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screen as they finally laid eyes on the secrets of the Croft Protocol. It was worse than they had imagined. They scrolled through unredacted internal communications, financial transfers to offshore accounts belonging to known fixers, and project timelines that chillingly correlated with the disappearances of several journalists. But the most damning evidence was a series of digitally signed directives from Julian Croft himself. There was the order to initiate surveillance on Anya, the authorization for the use of the brittle strand compound, and the final sickening memo sent the day after Anya's death, congratulating the security team on the successful resolution of the Montana problem. Ryan felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. Seeing the casual corporate language used to describe his wife's murder was a violation. He pushed back from the desk, his fists clenched. The fight was no longer just about justice. It was personal. After hours of absorbing the horrifying truth, a heavy silence settled over them. They had the weapon. Now they had to figure out how to fire it without being annihilated in the process. "We can't just leak it," Lena said, her voice barely a whisper, her usual confidence shaken. "Omnigen's PR machine will bury us. They'll call it a fabrication, a smear campaign by a disgruntled employee. Croft will have his lawyers tie it up in court for years. And while that's happening, his people will hunt down every last one of us." Marcus nodded grimly. "She's right. If we just throw this bomb, the shrapnel could take us all out. We need more than evidence. We need a strategy. We need to control the narrative from the first second." All eyes turned to Ryan. In the past week, he had become their de facto leader, the quiet center of their storm. He was no longer just the grieving husband. He was the soldier, the tactician Anya had known he could be. He looked at the determined faces around him, at the web of connections on Anya's wall, and the pieces began to click into place in his mind. This was a battlefield, and the enemy was a corporation. The objective was not to defeat them in a firefight, but to dismantle them from the inside out, using their own arrogance against them. "We don't just release the data," Ryan said, his voice low and steady. "We detonate it. But we need a diversion, a surgical strike to cripple their response." He stood and walked to a large map of the United States that Anya had pinned to the wall. "We need a plan. Let's call it Ghost Protocol, in her honor." For the next 2 days, the sanctuary transformed. The quiet refuge became a bustling, high-stakes command center. The despair was gone, replaced by a focused, determined energy. Ryan, using the same methodical approach he had used for mission planning years ago, broke down the operation into 2 distinct phases. Phase 1 was the information assault. Lena, in her element, became the architect of the data bomb. She worked tirelessly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She compiled all the data from the hard drive, including the contents of the Croft Protocol, into a single, heavily encrypted package. She then used a list of contacts found in Anya's notes, a network of 47 trusted, high-profile journalists from around the world, people Anya had vetted for their integrity and courage. "I'll set up a dead man switch on a secure server," Lena explained, her eyes bright with focus. "We set a timer. At the designated moment, the package will be sent to all 47 journalists simultaneously. They'll all have it at the exact same time. Omnigen won't be able to plug the leak because there won't be one leak. There will be 47. Phase 2 was Ryan's contribution, the trap. "A data dump isn't enough," he argued, pacing the floor of the cabin. "We need something to make it undeniable. Something live, something that can't be spun by lawyers. We need Croft." His plan was audacious. He would initiate a secure, encrypted video call directly to Julian Croft. He's arrogant, Ryan reasoned. He's a predator who thinks he's untouchable. He won't be able to resist the chance to gloat at the husband of the woman he had killed. You want him to confess? Marcus asked, skeptical. No, Ryan countered. A man like Croft will never confess. I want to bait him. I'll feed him a piece of calculated misinformation, something that makes him think we have evidence we don't. In his haste to correct me, to show how much smarter he is, he'll confirm something he shouldn't, and we will be recording every second of it. It was a classic psychological warfare tactic. Use the enemy's own ego as a weapon against him. The entire sanctuary mobilized. Dr. Thorne, the quiet scientist, revealed a surprising knack for electronics, helping Lena boost their satellite signal. Others ran cables, set up backup generators, and reinforced the watch schedule on the perimeter. Marcus used his old contacts to run a quiet background check on Anya's list of journalists, confirming they were all still active and secure. Everyone had a purpose. They were no longer victims in hiding. They were a single, cohesive unit preparing for battle. Through it all, Shadow remained a calm, reassuring presence. He would lie at Ryan's feet as he sketched out timelines on a whiteboard, or rest his head on Lena's lap as she coded, a silent guardian watching over his pack. On the third night, everything was in place. The data package was uploaded and ready. The secure communication line was established. The recording software was active. They were ready to hunt the monster. Ryan stood before the small group, the weight of the moment settling on all of them. Tomorrow at dawn, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that left no room for doubt. We finish what Anya started. The pre-dawn light was a weak, gray watercolor wash over the mountains. Inside Anya's cabin, the air was still and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The command center was a nest of cables and monitors. Lena sat at the laptop, her face pale in the screen's glow, running final diagnostics. Marcus stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the perimeter fence, a sentinel watching for threats both real and digital. Shadow lay at Ryan's feet, a warm, solid weight against his boots, the only creature in the room seemingly at peace. Ryan sat in a simple wooden chair, facing a webcam perched on top of a monitor. He wore a plain, dark sweater, his expression a mask of calm control. But beneath the surface, his heart was a hammering drum. This was it. This was the moment he faced his wife's killer. He wasn't just fighting for Anya anymore. He was fighting for Lena, for Marcus, for Dr. Thorne, and for all the other nameless victims of Omnigen's greed. Signal is stable. Encryption is holding, Lena reported, her voice a tense whisper. I'm routing the call through a dozen proxy servers, from Singapore to Stockholm. He won't be able to trace it back here before we're done. Are you ready? Ryan took a deep, steadying breath and gave a single, sharp nod. Lena's fingers danced across the keyboard, initiating call. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but a ringing tone. Ryan's eyes were locked on the blank screen. Then, the screen flickered to life. Julian Croft appeared. He was exactly as Ryan had pictured him from the corporate photos Anya had kept, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He was in what looked like a luxurious office, a wall of glass behind him showing a glittering city skyline at night. He held a crystal glass of amber liquid, the picture of untouchable power and privilege. Well, well, Croft began, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. To what do I owe this clandestine honor? I must say, your methods are rather dramatic. His eyes, cold and reptilian, held a glint of amusement. We need to talk, Croft, Ryan said, his voice even and devoid of emotion. He would not give this man the satisfaction of seeing his pain. Croft took a slow sip of his drink, savoring the moment. Ah, yes, you must be Ryan, Anya's husband. My deepest condolences on your loss. She was a spirited woman. A shame about that accident. So clumsy. The casual cruelty of the words was a physical blow. But Ryan held his ground. The soldier in him was in control, focused on the objective. "We know what you did," Ryan said, keeping his tone flat. "And we have the proof. We have the backups from your Zurich server." He had cast the line. Now he had to wait to see if the shark would bite. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed Croft's features, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a patronizing smirk. He swirled the liquid in his glass, the ice cubes clinking softly. He was enjoying this. "The Zurich server?" Croft chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "My dear man, you really are out of your depth. You have been chasing shadows." He leaned forward, a look of mock pity on his face. "Let me educate you, as a final courtesy to your late wife's enthusiasm." He took another sip. "That's foolish. The Zurich server has been offline for a long time. It was a decoy, a dead end. I let your wife and her little band of misfits chase for months. A complete waste of their time." Croft leaned back in his chair, beaming with self-satisfaction, his ego taking complete control. All sensitive data related to that project was moved to the Cayman Islands facility right after the accident on the mountain. The room behind Ryan was completely silent. Marcus's hand, which had been resting on his sidearm, slowly relaxed. Lena's eyes were wide, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. Croft had just done it. He hadn't confessed, but he had done something just as damning. In his arrogant need to prove his superiority, he had confirmed the existence of a secret offshore data haven, and, most importantly, he had personally and unequivocally linked its activation to the immediate aftermath of Anya's death. He had drawn a direct line from her accident to the cover-up of his most sensitive secrets. Ryan let the silence hang for a moment, letting Croft's words echo in the space between them. He had what he needed. "Thank you, Julian," Ryan said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You've been very helpful." The smile on Croft's face faltered. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty, of confusion, appeared in his cold eyes. He had been so sure of his position of power, so certain he was toying with a grief-stricken amateur. He opened his mouth to say something else, a threat or another insult, but Ryan was already reaching forward. The screen went black. Ryan leaned back in his chair, the tension draining out of him in a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Lena. "Did you get it?" Lena gave a slow, triumphant nod, a brilliant, teary smile spreading across her face. "Every single self-incriminating word. It's recorded, encrypted, and saved in triplicate." He handed us the missing link on a silver platter. Marcus clapped Ryan on the shoulder, his grip firm. "Anya would be proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ryan looked down at Shadow, who had stood up and was now resting his head on his knee, looking up at him with those knowing, loyal eyes. The trap had been sprung, the monster had taken the bait, and now it was time to let the world see him for what he was. There was no celebration, no moment of triumph after the call ended. There was only the cold, sharp focus of the mission's final, critical phase. The trap had been sprung, the evidence secured. Now came the reckoning. "Do it," Ryan said to Lena, his voice a low command that cut through the tense silence. Lena nodded, her expression a mixture of fear and fierce determination. With a few keystrokes, she initiated the ghost protocol. A progress bar appeared on the laptop screen, a thin green line that began to crawl slowly from left to right. "The upload has started," she announced, her voice barely a whisper. "The dead man switch is active. In 30 minutes, the package goes out to all 47 journalists. There's no stopping it now." Simultaneously, Ryan turned to a separate, encrypted messaging app on a tablet. He pulled up a single contact. Elias Vance, a veteran investigative reporter for the New York Times, a man whose reputation for integrity was legendary. Anya had called him her break glass in case of emergency contact. Ryan typed a short, pre-written message, a coded phrase Anya had established years ago. "The pines are whispering. Ghost is a go." He hit send. For a moment, the only sound in the cabin was the quiet hum of the electronics and the frantic beating of their own hearts. They watched the green progress bar, each percentage point a small victory. 5%, 10%. The silence felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice stretched over a deep, dark lake. It was Shadow who broke it. The dog, who had been lying quietly at Ryan's feet, suddenly lifted his head, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. He got to his feet, the fur on his neck bristling, and stared intently at the cabin door, his ears flattened against his skull. "What is it, boy?" Ryan murmured, his hand instantly going to the hunting rifle propped against the desk. Marcus was already moving, his own pistol drawn as he crept to the window, peering through a slit in the curtains. "We've got company," he hissed. "Multiple vehicles. No headlights. They're moving fast." Croft had retaliated. It was sooner and faster than they had anticipated. The arrogant CEO, realizing he'd been played, had dispatched his private army to clean up his mess. "They're here," Ryan announced to the others in the room, his voice calm and authoritative, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Lena, stay on that upload. Do not move from that desk, no matter what you hear. Marcus, with me. Dr. Thorne, get everyone else to the root cellar in the main cabin. It's the most secure point." Panic flickered in the eyes of the others, but Ryan's steady command held it at bay. They scrambled to follow his orders. The sanctuary, their refuge, was about to become a battlefield. The night erupted. The distant sound of rumbling engines grew into a roar as two black SUVs and a heavy-duty pickup truck screeched to a halt outside the perimeter fence. Doors flew open, and a dozen men, clad in black tactical gear and armed with assault rifles, swarmed out. They moved with brutal efficiency, using bolt cutters to snap the lock on the main gate. "They're in," Marcus reported, his voice grim. "Let them come," Ryan said. He and Marcus took up defensive positions on either side of the cabin's main door, using the solid log walls for cover. The upload was at 30%. They just had to buy time. The first wave of Omnigen security operatives stormed the compound, their flashlights cutting sharp, nervous beams through the darkness. The first shot was a deafening crack that shattered the night, fired from Marcus's pistol. One of the operatives went down. The compound instantly descended into chaos as the remaining men returned fire, bullets splintering the wood of the cabins. Ryan sighted down the barrel of his hunting rifle. He was a soldier again, the world narrowing to the space between his sights. He wasn't defending a position, he was defending a legacy. He was defending Anya. He squeezed the trigger, and another operative fell. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had the advantage of a prepared defense. Anya had designed the sanctuary with choke points and defensible positions. Ryan and Marcus moved between the cabins, using the darkness as their ally, their shots precise and controlled, forcing the attackers to slow down, to take cover. Inside Anya's cabin, Lena was a statue, her entire world shrunk to the green line on her screen, 60%. The sound of gunfire was terrifyingly close, but she didn't flinch. Dr. Thorne's voice came over the small radio on the desk. "Everyone is secure in the cellar, Ryan. Be safe." 75%. An explosion rocked the compound as the attackers used a breach charge on the door of the main cabin. Ryan and Marcus were now pinned down behind a stack of firewood. The professional soldiers were closing in, their movements coordinated, relentless. 90%. Almost there, Lena whispered into her radio, her voice trembling. Just as the Omnigen team prepared for their final push on Anya's cabin, a new sound cut through the cacophony of the firefight. It was a sound that didn't belong in this remote corner of Montana, the thumping, rhythmic beat of helicopter rotors, growing louder and louder. Suddenly, the entire compound was bathed in the blinding white light of a searchlight from above. A voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, boomed down from the heavens, a voice of absolute authority. "FBI, drop your weapons. You are surrounded. Drop your weapons now." The Omnigen operatives froze, caught in the open, their faces stark with shock and confusion. Seconds later, the forest on the far side of the compound erupted with movement as a dozen more figures, these ones wearing official FBI tactical vests, swarmed in, their weapons trained. The fight was over in an instant. The professional mercenaries, caught between the veteran defenders and a federal tactical team, threw down their weapons, their brief, violent siege ending in a humiliating surrender. Lena's voice, now shaking with relief, came over the radio. 100%. Upload complete. Ghost Protocol is a success. The world has it, Ryan. The world has the truth. Ryan lowered his rifle, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. He looked over at Marcus, who gave him a tired, grim smile. They had done it. They had held the line. As FBI agents began securing the scene, Ryan walked back to his cabin. Shadow met him at the door, nudging his hand, no longer growling, his tail giving a slow, steady thump. Ryan knelt and buried his face in the dog's thick fur, the loyal, steady beat of his heart, a testament to the battle they had all just won. 6 months later, the crisp Montana air no longer smelled of gunpowder and fear. It smelled of freshly cut lumber and wet earth. The harsh, menacing rasp of the barbed wire being torn down had been replaced by the rhythmic sounds of hammers and the low hum of conversation. The war was over. The rebuilding had begun. The fallout from Ghost Protocol had been a corporate apocalypse. The simultaneous data drop to 47 news outlets created a media firestorm that Omnigen Dynamics could not control, contain, or spin. The story was everywhere, on every channel, on the front page of every major newspaper in the world. The company's stock evaporated overnight. The board of directors, scrambling to save themselves, turned on their CEO. But it was the recording of the video call that sealed Julian Croft's fate. His arrogant, dismissive tone, combined with his slip of the tongue about the Cayman Islands facility, was the final, undeniable proof. It provided the federal investigators with the probable cause they needed to raid the offshore server. What they found there, combined with Anya's meticulously collected evidence, created an ironclad case. Julian Croft was arrested in his penthouse office, the picture of his stunned, disbelieving face, a satisfying final image for a world that now knew him as a monster. He and his top executives were facing a battery of federal charges, from corporate espionage to conspiracy to commit murder. Omnigen Dynamics, once a titan of the industry, was effectively dead. The sanctuary itself had undergone a transformation just as profound. The ominous name Whispering Pines was gone. In its place, a beautifully carved wooden sign arched over the entrance, bearing a new name, the Anya's Light Foundation. The intimidating chain-link fence had been dismantled. In its place, a simple, welcoming wooden fence was being erected. The cabins, once scarred by bullets, were being repaired and repurposed. What was once a secret hiding place for the hunted was being reborn as a public beacon for the truth. It was to be a non-profit organization, a haven dedicated to providing legal, financial, and emotional support to whistleblowers in dangerous industries. It was Anya's dream, given new life. Ryan stood on the porch of the main cabin, a mug of coffee warming his hands. The scruffy beard of a grieving man had been trimmed, and while the lines of hardship on his face remained, the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady sense of purpose. He was no longer running from the ghosts of his past. He was building a future in honor of the woman who had saved him from them. The doors of the foundation were now open to a new kind of resident: volunteers, lawyers, and counselors, all drawn by the story that had captivated the world. The original survivors were no longer hiding. They were the foundation's board of directors. Lena, no longer a fugitive, was its formidable head of communications, fielding calls from journalists and potential donors. Dr. Thorne was heading up an ethics committee, consulting on cases and helping to guide scientific research in a more humane direction. Marcus walked up and stood beside Ryan, handing him a set of blueprints. "The new wing for the guest housing is ready to be framed," he said. His voice, once laced with the constant tension of a man on the run, was now relaxed. He was no longer a spymaster in exile. He was the head of security for a place of hope. "Looks good," Ryan said, looking over the plans. Their conversations were no longer about defensive perimeters and ammunition counts, but about building permits and plumbing. The change was a quiet miracle. A happy bark drew their attention. Down on the newly seeded lawn, Shadow was in his element. He chased after a bright red ball, his powerful legs kicking up the rich soil, his gray and white coat a blur of joyful motion. He was no longer a silent, tense guardian. He was a dog, free to run and play in the sanctuary his family had built. He retrieved the ball and trotted back to Ryan, dropping it at his feet, his tail wagging, his tongue lolling in a happy pant. Ryan leaned down and scratched the big dog behind the ears. "Good boy," he murmured. "You did good." He straightened up, looking out over the valley. The work was hard, and the ache of Anya's absence was a quiet, constant companion. But it was no longer a destructive force. It was a motivation. He thought of the unspoken promise he had made, not just to Anya, but to himself. To honor her life, not just to mourn her death. He had come to this place following a ghost, a man broken by loss and war. But in finishing his wife's fight, he had found his own peace. He had taken her secret, a burden she had carried in the shadows to protect him, and transformed it into a legacy that shone in the light for all to see. The Whispering Pine Sanctuary was gone. In its place stood Anya's light, a testament to her courage and a beacon of hope for all those who dared to speak truth to power. And in that, Ryan had finally found his way home. Anya's story reminds us that the deepest love doesn't end with loss. It transforms into a legacy of courage, a quiet promise that even in our darkest moments, loyalty and truth can create a light for others to follow. If this story of a veteran's promise and a loyal dog's devotion touched your heart, we would be honored if you shared your thoughts in the comments below. Sharing this video helps us keep tales of sacrifice and hope alive, and subscribing to our channel ensures you won't miss the next chapter in our journey. Our newest tale has just appeared on the screen, and we invite you to join us for it.